You are listening to the Food Means Business podcast, which features the personal stories and secret ingredients behind what it's like to abandon your day job to start a CPG food and beverage business. I'm Janaba Johnson-Jones, former marketing executive turned entrepreneur and founder of food business incubator Hudson Kitchen. Join our community of fellow food business owners and subject matter experts to learn and laugh with us as we explore a startup world that's a little more culinary and a lot less corporate these days. Isabelle, welcome to the Food Means Business podcast. I'm so happy that you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Janaba. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So we met, I think it was almost 3 years ago when you participated in the We Stock pitch competition, and I was a judge.
Yes, that's right.
So
it feels like forever ago.
It was. Definitely feels like forever ago. So I would love to start with your story. If you can tell us how you went from working in corporate or doing what you were doing before you launched Lupii.
Yeah, totally. So I've only ever worked in startups. So I would say I was already kind of in that general emerging business space. The largest company I've ever worked for had 50 employees, and it felt huge to me at the time. And then after that, I worked for a number of really small startups where I was employee number 5 or 6 and really fell in love with that stage of the business. I love, feeling like everything I do every day really matters. And I love seeing the progress in front of me. I really enjoy that very much, and kind of taking something theoretical, an idea, and turning it into an operationalized reality. So really enjoy that. And in parallel of my professional experience, I developed a real passion for plant-based eating over the last 10 plus years, really driven by my personal journey. I actually grew up in Europe, moved to New York 10 years ago, and at the time transitioned from a vegetarian to a vegan diet, driven by a combination of reasons, initially ethical, and then starting to be more focused on health and the environment as well. And I found that as a consumer at the time, I started having a ton of options, but none that I really wanted to consume. So there were 2 main problems that I recall. One was a lot of the plant-based foods were overly processed. And what I mean by that is in kind of with the need to attain certain nutritional functionality, there were just so many ingredients in these products, and they a lot of times had things in them that I don't even know what they were, and I had no interest in putting them into my body. And then the other part that I noticed was a real concern around functionality and protein. But then I found like there was a real lack of options. It was all soy and pea, and there was no diversity in the source of protein. And so that kind of brought me back to my roots. I grew up in Luxembourg. A lot of my friends growing up were Portuguese and Italian because we have really large Portuguese Italian communities in Luxembourg. And I've always seen them snack on lupini beans. So I was always familiar with the bean. And about, 2017, 18 is really when I started thinking, okay, I want to do something professional with my life that I really care about. And I want to build it from scratch because I love this startup environment. And at the time I started researching different ingredients, I was like, there need to be more nutrient dense products that are less processed, that are also helping with biodiversity and diversity, just in terms of what we consume as it pertains to our gut health. Like I just, kind of saw that. And that brought me back to my roots. I kind of rediscovered lupini beans at the time and started doing some real in-depth research, talking to a bunch of farmers in Europe and to some entrepreneurs that were using it overseas, and was just blown away by the nutritional functionality. It has more protein and fewer carbs than any other bean, and it's packed with fiber, and it's regenerative, sustainable to grow. So I just became obsessed, seriously, with this ingredient. And I was like, we have to bring this to the US market, and I'm going to do that. And so left my last startup job in 2018. I love usually planning my next steps out. I didn't really have a plan, but I knew I needed more bandwidth because I was working a startup job. So more than a 40-hour week by far. And I needed just some space to do this full time. And so left my job and I was like, okay, I'm going to go build this lupini company. And that's kind of how the transition happened.
Did you save a little bit of money, or did you just kind of I'm just wondering like what your steps were in thinking
Yeah,
I'm going to make this
totally,
transition. Yeah.
totally. So I had always been a good saver. I'm lucky. I went to school in Europe, so I didn't graduate with crazy debts. So there was that
Yeah.
part.
Right.
Didn't live an exorbitant lifestyle, and I always was employed before I started Lupii. So, had some savings. I also had a really great supportive partner, and we
Yeah.
discussed this in depth. And we were like, okay, what's the plan? How long could I go without a salary? If, I get to a point where I can pay myself a salary, what would that look like? And at the time, actually, I remember being really uncomfortable with the idea of not making any income. And so I
Hmm.
told my partner, I said, you know what, I'm going to do some consulting work for startups and I'm going to still have enough time. I'll do like 20 hours a week of that and get paid and then work on Lupii for the rest. So I started doing that. But then quickly Lupii became more demanding
Right.
and so I got myself in a position relatively quickly where I was able to raise initial money, which then gave me the ability to pay myself a small salary. But yeah, financials were definitely a big part of the conversation. And I also will say I was in an incredibly lucky and privileged position to have a partner who
Yeah.
was like, you go do this. Like, I support you and we will figure out what that will look like from a lifestyle perspective to adjust to that because I believe that you need to be doing this. So, yeah.
That's really great. I actually have that same thing at home as well. I was able to
Yeah.
kind of go and live my dream. So it's really nice to have that. So definitely a privilege. Definitely
Yes.
very
Yes,
fortunate
for
for
sure.
sure. So Lupii, you created this protein
Mhm.
bar. Tell me like why a protein, like why not something else? Like why not using the bean to do a different type of
Yeah,
product?
totally, totally. So initially, when I first started doing R&D, this was still in my home kitchen, and then I ended up getting a food handler's license. I was still at my old job, and I spent free time getting a food handler's license. And a friend of mine owned a commissary kitchen, or he owned a restaurant and worked out of commissary kitchen. So he said, "You can use my commissary kitchen to make your product because
Nice.
needed to do that to be able to sell it." So initially, the first version of the product that I made, I thought about a lot of different versions. I looked at meat replacements, I looked at jerky, which was really funny in 2017. There weren't a lot of plant-based jerkies, and people were like, "Nobody's gonna buy this." And now there's like mushroom
Right.
jerky everywhere.
Everywhere. Yes.
But yeah, so and then I landed um on protein balls actually. So I hand made
Hmm.
them in that commissary and sold them in a store down the street from me and started doing some research on the category and quickly realized making, the protein bar category at the time was larger, it was growing faster than the ball category. It also felt like having a single serve option, is a higher velocity opportunity versus a
Yeah.
pack where you decant, individual balls.
Hmm.
So, and then operationally, it seemed like there were way more co-packing opportunities for that as well. I'll take a step back also before diving
Sure.
into that, but strategically, my vision has always been to build a brand platform for the ingredients. So we're not a protein bar company, and now we have pasta too. We're not a pasta
Right.
company. We're a lupini
Right.
company, and we're adding functional benefits in a less processed version or format to various different categories that you know today are lacking these functional benefits and our
Right.
benefits are around the fact that we can deliver on so much more protein and way fewer carbs than any other plant-based protein or than any other bean or legume. So that being said, a lot of the thinking was around, well, if we're introducing a new ingredient, that's going to be really hard to do that in the US market. Lupini beans are really common in other parts of the world, like in Europe, but nobody
Mhm.
in the States. When I first started researching this and looking at this, like 6 years ago, I mean, I would Google lupini. There was nothing there. Nobody
Nothing.
here in
Right.
the States knew what
Right.
it was. So found a lot about the format and bars seemed like a really great opportunity for the reasons around velocities and category growth and the fact that there were a lot of non-vegan players, but there were not a lot of winning plant-based players yet when I first started looking at it. But also there was no need for education. People know what a protein bar is. And
Right.
I'm just switching out the source of protein. So I'm using this vehicle, my little Trojan horse, to introduce the ingredients in a format that consumers understand. So those were reasons strategically from an innovation perspective that
Yeah.
we looked at that first, and then feasibility operationally, that all
Mhm.
seemed to work out. We also were able quickly to create a product with a healthy product margin in that category. So took all of these pieces into consideration, and then we launched in January of 2020, which
Mhm.
we had no idea what was waiting around the corner for us. And
No,
no one
no one
did,
knew.
and unfortunately, we were in one of the categories that did not take off during the pandemic because there was no travel and nothing happening on the
Right.
go and gyms were closed. The category is down by 40%. So we have to very much adjust our
Wow.
distribution strategy. We were always
Mhm.
gonna go after retail first, and we had to,
Right.
we were either gonna shut down the business 3 months after it launched, or we were gonna try to adjust and sell online, and that's what we ended up doing for 2 years, basically. We sold the bars, D2C and app.
That's interesting you say that because I think in our kitchen at the time, that's what happened.
Mhm.
Like people made the move from retail to e-commerce, and we ended up even converting a room in the kitchen to being like a packing
Right.
area. So they would pack boxes to get them out the door through UPS.
Yeah.
So that's really great. But I don't want to say also like this is the product here. Um, Really, this is it here. It's a really smart way to introduce a new ingredient because just a bar. It's a
Mhm.
bar. It's a protein bar, and I think saying that and it tastes really good, by the way.
Mhm.
So then no one will think about the fact that
Mhm.
it's a new ingredient. They'll learn it because they're going to read the package, but really they're going to try it first because of what it is.
Yeah.
That was fun. That's so smart.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, and not so obviously, but the question we always are asking ourselves in how we communicate to consumers on pack or online is like, how important is the ingredient? How important is the functionality? How do we lead with flavor and taste and deliciousness? So like really finding that balance, because exactly like you're saying, we kind of want people to just try it because it's a cool looking, unique protein bar that delivers on some nice functionality that has only 6 ingredients. But then also we want people to start knowing about this bean because the bean is really the hero, but it will take time
Right.
to do that education. So that's kind of the biggest challenge that we're facing as a brand.
Yeah, just educate, but education through products that people are already used to
Yeah, yeah,
consuming. So
yeah.
that's great. So you conceived of the company, but you also took on a
Mhm.
co-founder. So I'm wondering, can you talk about the process? I thought it was really interesting, the process of looking for someone to kind of add to the company. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yeah. So at the time, this was in early 2019. I had left my last job a few months ago. I had done a little bit of consulting work, started working on this more seriously, and ended up reconnecting actually with an investor that I had met years before. And I had done some work for them at the time, between two jobs. And so they actually, interestingly, reached out to me and asked if I was interested in doing some research for them on the plant-based food space. And so I was like, ooh, this is the universe is really bringing all these things together, because I'd left my
Yes.
job. I wanted to focus on this lupini project full time. And then these guys reached out. And so I started working, doing some research for them. And then I quickly was like, actually, guys, like I have an idea for a business and I've already done some research on that. I already have some prototypes. And so they were very excited. We talked for a few months and they were really excited about the proposition and the vision. And their thesis was always around investing in co-founding teams. They just
Mhm.
thought it would de-risk the business, especially I think at the time, for them, the fact that I had no food and beverage experience, they were like, we like you, but we need also someone on this team in this early stage that knows how food and beverage works. So, and I
Right.
totally agree with that. I'm all about collaboration. And I think, I always want to surround myself with people that are smarter and better at, what I'm doing so that I can learn and grow and make the right decisions. So I was definitely on board with that. But then I was kind of tasked with this project of finding a co-founder for this business that didn't yet exist. It was a deck. It were some, handcrafted prototypes. It was a potential investor who was willing to write a decent check. but like it was high risk, for anyone to leave their corporate job. And
Mhm.
so I went on a quest, really literally had a spreadsheet going. I still have that spreadsheet where I would just add all kinds of people that I met throughout this journey. I started off with kind of this investors network. They knew a few people in food and beverage. I'd grab coffee with these people or have calls and tell them about the idea. At the time, I was super paranoid. I was like, somebody else is going to go and build this lupini company. So I had to really understand, I need to share a little bit more to get people excited. And
Right.
every meeting, and that's one thing that I love culturally about this country, right? Like people are so generous and they are always excited to help. Or at least that was my experience. And every
Right.
meeting would lead to 2 or 3 more introductions. And it also, talking to all these different people really helped me to understand kind of the profile I was looking for. I've worked for startups, so I've kind of had like a jack of all trades type of skill set, but I'm definitely
Mhm.
leaning more to operations and sales. I mean, those were kind of the roles that I had been in previously. And as I started learning about the industry and talking to all these different people, I realized, okay, I need some marketing support. I don't know anything about marketing. It's not something that, organically I connected with. And I never really did any of that in my previous jobs. And so ended up meeting my business partner, Allie, through a former coworker of hers, who I grabbed coffee with. And she said, I'm not going to be your co-founder because I'm not looking for this type of role, but you should talk to my former coworker. And Allie and I grabbed coffee, and it just was a really great fit at that moment. She was at Pepsi at the time and was
Mhm.
actually had been considering jumping into something else. And she had a really strong innovation and marketing background. And so a few weeks after we first met, and we talked a few times and met for coffee again and introduced our husbands to each other. And a few weeks later, she said, okay, I'm going to leave my job. I'll do this full time with you. So she jumped
Wow.
on board. And then with that, we got the investment from this investor who was interested. They also met her and approved. And so that's how it all came to be.
That's amazing. But it's really nice that you took the time to like kind of have the conversations and not kind of rush into a relationship with end up you have some lasting
Yeah,
like commitment.
totally. And I remember actually, I mean, I probably met with 60, 70 people throughout like a 3 months process and 3 months time frame. And I really didn't do much else at the time because I had, the deck and the concept ready and I was just looking for this co-founder. And I remember really thinking, I might not find this person because,
Yeah.
the thing that was the sticking point every single time I would meet someone we were interested in each other. It was like, oh, but like, this is a startup and I'm working for a big, comfortable corporation right now where I
Right.
have healthcare and I kind of have a path carved out. It just, honestly, that's what I realized during that process. I think going into it, I was super naive about it because, like I said, I've only
Mhm.
worked for startups. It was like, that's not, whatever, like it will work out. But I think coming from a more traditional career, that does feel like a really big risk to take. And so, yeah.
It's a huge risk, like, because but also you're leaving it's, like, so cushy and comfortable
Hmm.
and, like, I don't know, in Manhattan, like, we would take, cars
Yeah.
everywhere, and I don't know, it was great, and have I don't know, have, like, l sales meetings, and it would be all wonderful, and
Yeah.
I had one job where they gave us Prada bags for Christmas, and, like,
Yeah.
so you get, like
See, exactly.
and then, like, you're kinda in it, and you're like, "Do I wanna leave and take this risk?" So,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I could see why
Totally.
people were hesitant,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so yeah, I feel like I did get very lucky to meet Ali at the time and it was the right fit. So yeah.
That's awesome. So talk a little bit about kind of building out your team because there was the two of
Mm.
you, and then obviously you can't do
Mhm.
everything, given the fact that you're trying to grow this company. So I'm just curious as kind of like who were the first hires once you got the
Yeah.
right.
So it's been kind of a little bit less focused on full-time hires and more on fractional support. And
Hmm.
again, I think that's something I've learned from my previous startup experiences. I'm a big believer you can outsource a lot of things for a long period of time. And like
Right.
one thing
Right.
that we're doing is we're co-packing. So we're not owning our manufacturing. So we don't have to
Right.
manage a team there.
Yeah.
I think finance is incredibly important to have the right accounting and kind of finance team in place. But at this stage of the business, it's enough to have fractional support on that front.
Right.
Sales, I am a huge believer in doing sales yourself for a while because you're the best person at selling.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so we do have a broker that we started working with 2 years ago. But again, that's not sales. It's a broker. So support for that. But I'm still doing, 99% of the sales myself. And then Allie covering marketing. We do have part-time support on the operations side and kind of like a little bit of a
Hmm.
jack of all trades, which I think at this stage of the business is a really fantastic asset to have a person that can wear many hats and is comfortable
Right.
jumping and learning, which not everybody is, and that's totally fine. It's a very specific person that's kind of a generalist. And I think that's super valuable at this early stage. So we haven't really brought on much full-time support to this stage. And I do have plans to bring on a first hire, and it would probably be on the operations side,
Right.
which is what I'm covering right now. But we're kind of making that contingent a bit on growing the business a little bit further where we can justify bringing that on board. So I think there's kind of two schools of thought, right? There's the you got to do everything, you need to quickly find the support. And I do generally agree with that.
Hmm.
But I think also an emerging business, the needs are changing constantly. Like imagine if we hired a head of retail sales in January of 2020 and 3 months later the world shuts down and we don't do retail sales. That person is probably, a relatively experienced person that's not just going to go jump in and run our Amazon sales for us. So I
Right.
think
Right.
just being realistic around where is your business at? Have you proven kind of the path forward where you can just like add some fuel to the fire and it grows like that? Or are you still kind of figuring out where you're going and what your needs are? And then also it's a cash management question too. And so that's how I've been thinking about building out the team.
So I'm wondering if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Oh my God. What would I do differently? It's so hard to think about myself in 2019 because I had zero experience in the food and beverage space. I think one thing now in hindsight is maybe I wouldn't have entered the bar category as the first product
Hmm.
because it is such a competitive category. And again, we at the time, 2019, I mean, there had been some really great acquisitions that had already happened. There was definitely an opportunity to grow, but it was already a really crowded category. So, some kind of strategic thinking around what's the first product line. Maybe I would have made some adjustments around that, but I'm saying that having had to fight through the category being down so much during the pandemic.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
I don't, other than that, I said there's so many little things, right, that I learned throughout the journey, but I wouldn't say necessarily I would have done them fundamentally differently. I think, yeah, I don't know. It is just all these learnings that now make so much sense. Like an example, our bars initially launched in transparent packaging, which we thought was really cool because you could see the
Yeah.
product. And well, operationally, or from a product quality perspective, the product was drying out really quickly. So,
Yeah.
like tactical things like that, where you're like, my God, why did we not test this? Why didn't we think about this? Little things like that, I would definitely tweak. Yeah, I think those are kind of the main things that I can think about.
I think the lessons are important. Like you made the decisions that you made at a
Mhm.
certain time with a certain set of information that you had. You learned something from it and you're able to move forward. So I always think like I in my head I'm like, if I would have only done this, but you just don't know until you have an experience.
Yeah,
So
totally. And I
yeah.
think, one thing actually that I do really feel like this experience has been validating. I am a big believer in scrappiness. It relates a little bit to your question about building out a team and testing things before getting too married to something or throwing money at something. I'm a real big
Right.
believer in being scrappy on that front at the early stages. And because I do think anybody who raises $100 million is going to create a lot of top line revenue growth unless you totally like, I mean, it's almost impossible not to do that. But
Right.
if you're not doing that, then you have to really prove stickiness and product market fit. And how can you do that in a scrappy way? Like, you know, uh, we've had some experiences where I actually did our own PR when we first started. I would just reach out to
Hmm.
press and send emails and got really good traction and response from that. And then for a while, we had an agency partner, and it was a great agency. But in hindsight, I'm like, that was not the right allocation of funds. We
Right.
Because also you're still so small. Like, what is the story you're telling? You know, why do you need a full agency to support you on that stuff? And I think it's kind of sticking to your guns a little bit and not getting distracted. This was around the time where there were so many D2C food and beverage brands in like 2021
Right.
exploding and all over the place. And then you're looking left and right and you're like, oh my God, I need to also like throw some cash at this.
Right.
Throwing cash at stuff doesn't solve, it doesn't really solve problems and doesn't
Solves
create, yeah,
nothing.
it doesn't
It
create a
solves
brand. It doesn't create
nothing.
product
Yep.
stickiness at this stage. So that's a really big learning for me is like going back to what I've learned as an employee at startups, which is
Hmm.
you can get pretty far being scrappy and testing things out. And
Yeah.
yeah, throwing money at stuff doesn't just, like I said, solve anything.
I've learned the hard
Yeah.
way, I have to say.
Yeah.
So let's talk about pasta. So I have a little bit of pasta here. So why pasta as the second
Yeah.
product that you decided?
So want to meet consumers at different occasions throughout the day. And the bars are doing a great job. You know, a lot of our customers are eating them as a snack, as a pre or post workout food, as a meal replacement, in addition to something else. So we're already kind of covering different touch points throughout the day. But we're really interested in center of the plate, lunch, dinner, you
Mm.
know, bringing incremental functionality to certain categories there to staple products that people consume, where today there's little innovation. And so we looked at various categories. This was about 2 years ago when we started thinking about the next product range and looked at various categories. Don't want to go into too many details there, but
Sure, of
we
course.
ended up landing on pasta for a few key reasons. The fit from a functionality perspective is super obvious. Like, it's a wheat pasta is traditionally a category that lacks nutrients, I'd say, and that's just
Hmm.
full with carbs. And we know consumers are looking for more protein, more fiber, way less carbs. That's what our bean is doing best from a functionality perspective. What we also noticed was there are more and more alternative pastas out there, and Banza is really the leader, and they've created that category and
Right.
started over 8 years ago. But there is no innovation within that alternative category. I'd argue it's all just another lentil or chickpea pasta. And what that means is they're just differentiated in branding, not really in nutritional functionality. They look exactly the
Right.
same on that front. So we saw, you know, it's a growing category. It's a category with a big winner, but would also real opportunity to come in and do something incremental and new for consumers. So, and then there is a whole work around, you know, is this feasible? Can we find a partner to make this product for us? Can we reach
Hmm.
the functional goals that we're trying to hit on? Making this product, is this product working from a margin perspective? So a lot of work around that as well. But those were kind of the steps that led us to launching into the pasta category about a year ago.
How has entrepreneurship changed you? I know you went from working at
Mhm.
startups to having your own startup, and I'm wondering how you've changed for the better.
Um, you know, I just feel incredibly grateful being on this journey. I remember being at startup jobs previously and feeling like not incredibly fulfilled emotionally, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And I do feel building this business has been incredibly fulfilling. It's been the most challenging thing by far professionally that I've ever done. But I actually think that the emotional reward that comes from the learning and the growing that is just constant is I'm so grateful for that. And, you know, I have friends who are jobs, startups or not, that are just not happy and that can't wait to drop the pen at 5 and be done. I don't feel that way about building this
Right.
business. And I've never experienced anything like that professionally. It's just incredibly fulfilling. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And going back to your very first question around, having a supportive partner who is, supporting that and encouraging it is also just really fantastic. So I would say it's made me very grateful building this business.
Awesome. What do you do for self-care? So I know that you eat really well, but what else are you doing?
Um, yes. So I didn't grow up being very athletic as a kid. Very, very traditional European family. My parents were like, "Why would you work out if you can just walk?" So I'm like, okay, that's definitely changed. And but a few years ago, I actually discovered running, and I love running so much. I'm really into half marathons and marathons. Those are kind of really good distances for me. And
Mm,
it feels, while it also is important to take care of your body afterwards, it does feel like real self-care to be able to treat myself to that. And especially when I travel, or even, I live in Brooklyn, there's so many amazing parks around here on the waterfront. It's just really nice to put your phone away and use your body and go on a run and move your body around. So that's one of the big things that I'm doing. And then, I think I very much, I'm not consistent with some of these other practices that I go in and out of. I actually was certified in yoga teaching over 10 years ago. So
oh,
did a lot of
wow.
meditation at the time. And it's
Hmm.
something that I kind of go in and out of, but that's also part of my practice, especially when things get really loud and overwhelming. And then the other part is that I have a therapist. So it's huge for self-care. Started working with a therapist actually around the time when I started launching and building the business, which has been really
Hmm.
amazing. And that's been such a fantastic toolkit in my box. Yeah.
I have a therapist as well, and I started, I guess it was February 2022, and I love it because I felt like I needed someone to hold space
Yeah.
just for me, and I think that has been the key to like a little bit less stress, less
Yeah.
anxiety, is just having that moment on a weekly basis
Yeah, I
to
couldn't
be
agree
able to talk
more.
to
Yeah,
someone.
and I feel like
Yeah,
sometimes I know that you can fall into a pattern where you're treating your partner or your friend like a therapist, and I would never want
right,
to do that. And I think like we all probably have a lot of unresolved stuff from our childhoods and teenage years. When you're then adding on starting a business, which is like such a personal experience that your ego is so involved in, I
yeah,
feel like it's like the perfect mix to create an explosion if you're not creating a really good supportive system around yourself. So I agree with you, like having someone who's holding space and who has perspective and is kind of independent from you is incredibly,
right.
incredibly valuable in this process.
It's been amazing for me. So at Hudson Kitchen, we have a money bell that we ring when we're celebrating something. So I'm wondering, what are you celebrating right now?
So we got into a really, really large retail account with our pasta. Not sharing
Nice.
quite yet who it is, but it's a real
Okay.
game changer for us from a business perspective. It's not launching until a few months of now, so I need to practice a lot of patience, which I'm not super good at. But it's a huge win. It's just so exciting. It's also really exciting to have a buyer who's just so gung ho about your product. So that's something that I've just been really proud of and looking forward to actually landing on shelf there.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. And Isabel, thank you so much for being here. Please let everyone know how they can find about you and Lupii.
Yes. So thank you for having me. And anyone can find us on our website at getlupii.com. And then on Instagram and TikTok, we're also at getlupii, GETLUPII. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. The Food Means Business podcast was produced by Hudson Kitchen. It is recorded at the studio at Kearney Point and mixed and edited by Wild Home Podcasting. Our theme song is by Damian DeSandes, and I'm your host, Janaba Johnson-Jones. Follow Hudson Kitchen on Instagram at The Hudson Kitchen, and to get food business bites right in your inbox, sign up for our newsletter at thehudsonkitchen.com/newsletter. Listen, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get podcasts. Until next time.